case, I really like to welcome Valentina Riva here, which was already present at the World Tour, at least in the chat section, and I was talking about the Working Animal Alliance. I also like to welcome Tim Harrigan here, which will represent TELUS International, which we already talked about several times here. And then again, I would like to welcome Astrid Masson. She was also 2 or 3 times represented in the World Tour. She's a cattle expert in Germany, working at the state domain of Dahlem. I covered that in my paper as well. And I think she can already bring very important and interesting aspects to this panel discussion. The intention of this discussion now will be to bring it to the point. We have to ask the question, what comes next? And this would be my entry into the panel discussion. The question to you panelists, what are we going from here now? I want to ask the question to you, what in your opinion are the most pressing and important steps now to move forward with the topic of animal traction? I think that's a good start to the discussion.
Are you asking for volunteers, or are you going to?
Well, you just volunteered, so go ahead.
You know, I guess for me, and this comes back to being involved in international work and working with funding agencies and some things. I think it's the image that animal traction is backward and is not, and a sense that we need to move in a direction of modernization, which they, I think, define quite often as tractorization. You know, however, you know, it's pretty clear to me, and I think we learned today, that it's important that, well, technology really is a fit between that technology and the context in which it is used. So we have small farms, we have very poor farmers, we have an integrated system here with livestock, and from an ecological standpoint, soil health standpoint, the opportunity to return manure, you know, to the cropping system, add organic matter. You know, there's a number of reasons why we need to change our thinking or help them understand what we're doing. And I think we can do that probably by turning the attention a little bit away from the power of the draft animal source, and informing folks that really the application of the technology, the application of modern knowledge, as we saw with Primata, as we saw with, you know, certainly with tillers, and we've seen with others, where we are actually reducing tillage intensity. We're adding organic back to the soil. We're reducing fuel use. We're lessening the load on the soil. Tired tractors are more damaging to soil than animals are. So I think in some ways help people turn their attention away from the actual power source and into the application of knowledge, modern knowledge, in the ecological system that we're dealing with. I think may be something that we need to try and do. That's all I'll say.
I think that embedding the results of the work with draft animals into the UN Sustainable Development Goals is key in that respect. I was wondering, Berta, what you would think from an African perspective, if would you second what Tim just said, or do you think there are, looking at different continents, are more pressing issues or actions to take? You just have to turn on your mic first. I think that you're still muted. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. I have to go along with what he says, but I also think that we have to work more with the networks so that we are able to pass on the information within the various countries particularly of the modern image of the draft animal power. I also think that the issue of conservation tillage or conservation agriculture is crucial, together with the issues of climate change. We have a lot of information at the moment pertaining to conservation tillage, but maybe not necessarily conservation tillage with draft animals. But if we push conservation tillage with draft animals, then we're moving more to sustainability, where we have issues of minimum soil disturbance, increased soil fertility, reduction of soil erosion, all those issues that are current to climate change. So I think that is the way to go.
Thank you, Berta. I think, yeah, that's really brought to a point. You mentioned the importance of networking, and I mean, that's the reason why we're here today. We want to share knowledge. We want to basically also get to know each other. And nevertheless, always when it comes to networking on a larger scale, there are issues that arise. And I was wondering if an author of a book about networking, in this case, Paul Starkey, might want to add a few comments on that, what the real task now would be to build up a network which would actually not break away after a couple of steps, but be sustainable in a way to promote that draft animal topic on a global scale. What do you think, Paul?
Yes, I think it's networking is really important. I think a lot of us know each other because of the networking activities that we've taken part with in the past. In the past, of course, it was physical networking, but increasingly it's going to be electronic networking. I think it's really important to encourage this and exchanges. My experience with different networks is that it is the activities that bring people together. It is doing things together. It can be virtually, of course, collaborating, organizing workshops like this. It is that type of activity that is important. The structure of the network, who is the chair and who is the committee and things like this. I think that it should not be important. I think it's important just to get people networking, whatever the mechanism. And I thoroughly appreciate the various networking initiatives that have been suggested or have already started. I think Africa in particular, it benefited a great deal from the West Africa network, the at NESA, the Animal Attraction Network for Eastern Southern Africa, and also national networks, some of which, including KENDAT and the Réseau Guinéen de l'Attraction Animale, are still operating at a national level. But we need to get that type of thing, and then we can get some advocacy and influences.
Thank you, Paul. I was wondering, Valentina, when I think about the Working Animal Alliance, which was just founded, how you think, as you follow a global approach, how that combination of advocacy and that network will help us to reach that goals.
Hi, hello everyone. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to take part in this really interesting conference. I mean, as an advocacy and policy person myself, I've learned loads on the technical nitty-gritty element of animal attraction. It's fascinating, so thanks. Well, from my point of view, I see that despite the fact that, as I said, I've learned a lot, I can see that the issue is the same. So the contribution of draft animals or working animals remains largely overlooked and is not obviously adequately reflected in relevant policies and programs, etc. So animals are, as for instance, many organizations describe them, remain invisible when it comes to high-level policies, for instance, because of a number of reasons. So there's this cultural concept that animal attraction does not represent progress, but actually sort of going back, to poverty. And we see that in many presentations, but in my opinion, there's also lack of, and I think Professor Moser also reflected that in his presentation, there's a lack of robust data and evidence that demonstrate and can illustrate to policymakers that the numbers are there, and animal traction draft animals should be taken into account in an adequate manner. But because there's a lack of all this, there's no incentive. I can see no incentive, no motivation. So in this sense, obviously, advocacy, public affairs, networking, lobbying, we can call it in a different way, in my opinion, is crucial. So obviously, we need to craft strong and powerful messaging. So using the narrative of the fact that working animals and draft animals support the livelihoods of millions of people around the world, across the world, not only in some countries, because we usually highlight their contribution in the global south, what were they called, obviously before developing countries, but we've seen with other presentations that actually draft animals are used in the region, all the regions of the world, and we have very, very, very good and positive examples that showcase high level of health and welfare standards that can be, in my opinion, can be used in powerful messaging. So advocacy is there. I use the term advocacy in a broader sense as public affairs, networking, lobby. Advocacy is there to help and support create this crucial shift in the cultural concept of draft animals, so that we can create a supportive, a strong environment where animal traction is considered progress and not a U-turn, towards modernization. So we need to make sure that our messages, we show that we are making the most out of tradition, out of expertise, culture that has been accumulating throughout centuries. And this leads to recognition that working animals, so working equids, all the animals, regardless of the species, are considered assets by national governments, by decision makers, by donors as well. So the interest is raised in donors that can then fund some of the initiatives. So the presentation from Philippe Laos, and I saw in the chat that someone was saying, probably Philippe was saying that it's difficult to sell the machine because essentially people are not interested in buying it, or the EU the regulator is not interested in buying it. But I think it's because we miss that message that highlights the fact that working animals, draft animals, are assets, and so that we need to highlight the value of the investment. So investing in draft animals rather than the cost. So I think that's the main thing.
Thank you a lot, Valentina, for that really important comments of yours, especially highlighting also the importance of science in that respect. You also mentioned tradition, and this goes now to Drew Conroy and Astrid Masson, maybe, as Drew has shown us in his presentation that this tradition of keeping oxen, of going into competition with oxen, helps to keep this tradition alive, and also helps to facilitate that knowledge, and also helps to, well, improve harnessing. We talked about better yokes and stuff. And when I think about Astrid and her work in a museum context, you have a big publicity. You have lots of people coming there every year to Berlin, see these animals, and in a traditional context. And I was wondering what you do think from that more traditional perspective we can take to bring this matter forward and to empower our cause of draft animals in the world.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me too. Yeah, in the museum, the people are often wondering why where we need cattle and not horses. And then I began to explain that 50 years ago it was a normal picture to have cattle and not horses, or both. And the interest even of youth people it's very great. It's very big for that thing. And we make workshops, and people come, and even young people are interested, and also people which have small scale farms come and want to know it. I think we all which are here on this event have to continue what we just doing. That's the right way. We have continue and make more of it, and to learn to teach people, to teach the animals, and to show it. And our role in the world is also important, because if people in other countries, I think yesterday the paper from Bosnia-Herzegovina impressed me very much, because that people thought they have a bad job, and it shows me how privileged we are here. And if we show that for us it's a privilege to work with animals, maybe it can show other people that it's not a bad thing. So we have our small role also here in Europe.
That's true. Drew, what would you have to add to that? I was asking Drew to add to that now.
Okay.
So I would say, Klaus, I mean, 50 years ago, we really saw a decline in oxen. When I was first, having an interest in it as a boy, the numbers were much lower than they are now. From the 1940s to 70s, there was a decline. And as you pointed out, I mean, and I did as well, we have had these agricultural shows, but the inclusion of young people, the development of this 4-H program, which is, indirectly supported by the government, not specifically for oxen, but for many activities for youth, we convinced our local 4-H executives that this was something very unique. And yes, it's a bit historic. Many of the challenges that Yao presented, we probably had pushback. I was just a boy, so I don't know exactly, are we just teaching people this historic skill? But we looked at it as something broader. I mean, we're teaching children responsibility. We're teaching them how to interact with animals. We're giving children an opportunity to develop an animal that they can then exhibit. So for example, if you show beef cattle, dairy cattle, sheep, or goats at agricultural shows in the United States, you have to have high quality animals. You have to have certain pedigrees. You have to spend a lot of money. I grew up on a dairy farm. We didn't have dairy cattle I could have exhibited without getting last place. They were not quality animals. However, I could take 2 Jersey bull calves. Jersey bull calves in America are worth $5 each, or maybe $2 each. So they're worth less than a rat you buy at a pet store, but you can take those Jersey calves, you can train them, and you can exhibit them, and you can win money, and you can use them on your farm. So for me, I've spent, and you may have seen this in my video, I'm a teacher and I'm a trainer of oxen. I have done international work and really relished that as well. And again, giving Paul Starkey and Dick Rosenberg credit for opening my eyes. But as my video showed, I work a lot with young people. I'm not in a museum. It's not my job at the university to work with 8, 9, 10-year-olds. But every chance that I get, I volunteer, I bring my animals into the public, and some people were expressing the challenge of bringing animals into the public. And I realize that may be an issue, in the United States at the moment. It's not. We do have an insurance issue, and I have to get liability insurance for my animals. But sometimes we do that through organizations that support draft animal power. So for me, I mean, I really see the young people as a conduit to keeping this alive, but exciting them about something different. I mean, there's so many lessons. And I think we, the people that keep draft animals, more so than people who are working in other areas of draft animal power, those of us at Living History Farms, and, this is a wonderful opportunity, and maybe have, days where the children could try driving oxen. That is a huge, we have agricultural shows. When we invite the public to come in and drive the oxen, we have hundreds of children standing there in line wanting to just walk with the oxen. And the photographs they have, and do we get many of them that really train oxen? Yes, a few. I mean, if we have 500 young people and 3 decide, I want to do this, mommy, we have a farm. So that's been a lot of my work, has been promoting this. But so have many other people. But I saw this as something when I was a young boy. There were no written books about how to train oxen. So I wrote my first book about this when I was 20 years old, and I look back at it now, there's a lot of things that I would say different, and I did. I mean, I have 3 books. And again, the idea was to promote the use of oxen, And I do try to make it economic. I just put something in the chat, but I'm not a full-time farmer, but I do try to make my oxen pay for themselves. And I tell people, if you buy them, train them and sell them, you can often recoup your money.
Thank you, Drew. I think from every perspective, from museum perspective, from university perspective, from a well, half-time ox driver perspective as a hobby, everybody can contribute to this a greater topic. And I will come back to that cultural importance a little bit later in the discussion. What I wanted to highlight now and ask in the panel is, when we look at the discussions and when we look at the papers, we saw that there was a high need, and this is completely true, to get to the political decision makers, to get them recognize draft animals more, and to embed these in, for example, the UN sustainability goals. But I was intrigued by some comments which said, can't it also help a lot from a bottom-up approach rather than from a top-down approach? So I was thinking, when we maybe think about consumerism and the people, we had that in that example of the vineyards in France at the World Tour yesterday, that they enable people to earn their living with draft animals because they support this type of working. They support the low input or the low pressure on the soil, and they're willing to pay more for it. I was thinking what you think about that approach. Also, not only to focus on the political decision makers, but to also get the wider public to create a momentum to maybe even make the political decision makers change their minds about it. So this would be to everybody here in the panel.
May I add something here, Klaus?
Yeah, sure.
And I try to link it with what it was said before. I think we need to go in all possible directions. And because if it's true that we need to make the policy makers to understand the importance of working equities, and my challenge now to all in the room, and I think we have around 190 people here, if you just text on the internet something that is called Mobilizing Sustainable Transport for Development, that is a United Nations report, you will see trains, planes, bicycles, all kinds of transportation, but you will not see a working animal. So, and what I want to say with this is that working animals are not seen by policymakers as something truly sustainable. And we see all the politicians wasting the word sustainability. I used to say as a joke, if I receive €1 for every politician that says the word sustainability, I'll be rich by now without working. And what happened is that we reach a moment where the word sustainability is an empty word. And suddenly here we are trying to put working animals in the right place, in a place where they deserve the respect, in a place where we show throughout all these presentations and this debate over the last 2 years, and in each individual work that we do, that animals, they are truly sustainable, that they have low impact in the different types of activities that they do. So yes, we need to continue that way, but we also need to find strategies to go, as I was saying, outside the bubble. Every single person in this room is here because we like animal traction. But just as an example, there was a meeting in 2019 in Lisbon that was from the European Ecology Society, and it was all about the ecology and the sustainable development goals. I was the only single person talking about working animals, and I felt like the alien in the room. No one actually ever thought about the idea of bringing working equities, in this case, into the equation. So what I want to say is that we need to go in all possible directions, and don't be afraid to go to those areas where we'll know that will be the aliens. I felt the aliens so many times in so many different conferences, whereas I'm actually the only one talking about working equities. So, and that's even difficult for me, because I don't think it's difficult for any speaker in this room to say that working with animals is something nice in this conference. I think it's much difficult to say that working animals can be profitable in an economy conference or in a in an ecology conference like it happened to me. So I really think we need to go in all possible directions. And I was reading the chat, and someone was saying that we need to be ambassadors. Yes, we need to be ambassadors, but we need to be ambassadors out of the bubble. It's easy. The expression I was saying is easy to preach. The difficult thing is to go out and face, and it's mainly facing the fact that people are ignorant about this. So we need to keep that in mind. We need to play fair. We need to use our time and our knowledge to share that. And don't judge the people just because they don't agree exactly with our ideas about the use of animal traction. And that's a very complex and very time-consuming process. Spend time explaining people why we're not mistreating animals, why we're not from the past, or why we are not aliens trying to promote something that doesn't exist, or because they think that doesn't exist, is not easy. But that's a challenge for all of us in this virtual room.
But I think you're absolutely right. You commented on that ambassador quote in the chat, and I think that's really it. Being ambassadors outside of the bubble and going in every direction. That's it's really good. Anyone else in the panel wants to add on that? Tim.
Yeah, I would agree. Very good points. I think, and again, I think that comes back to the image of as being backward. I know that in the recent past, in competing for grants, for instance, for international work is very important, because you're asking for funding from people who may think that what you're doing is totally inappropriate, because it's not appropriate technology, even though you can demonstrate that it is the most important technology for that area. But, so it depends on what the challenges are. And even here, looking for demonstration work and animal promotion work, I've submitted grants to organizations that are very strongly organic production interested. But they do not want to hear about animal traction, because they think that other people in that organization will think that they are supporting and wasting money, that they're putting into it. So, I mean, depending on what your goals are, it's a very difficult challenge, and I guess that's why I think it's really important to highlight. And I said earlier, not the draft animal, because I think the traction source is very important, but highlight, the application of modern knowledge and an ecosystem sensitivity that you're applying to the environment. Highlight that, because the animals will attract their own attention. The difficulty is getting someone's attention off the animal long enough to inflict some education on them about what the advantages are.
That's absolutely true.
I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah. So actually, I was saying I smiled when Joao told us about the episode in 2019, because in the same year I had a very similar situation when I attended World Water Week, which is an event organized annually by the Swedish Water Institute about water, so the water sector, and brings together stakeholders from the private sector, UN agencies, governments, you name it. You've got everybody. My director and I attended the conference for the first time, following a suggestion from our consultant working on UN engagement with us. So we went there, and for a week, we were in this place where we heard presentations, we attended side events, panel discussions, we saw pictures, films, clips, everything. Working animals and animals in general were everywhere. As example of collecting water, transporting water for working livestock, whatever you can think of, anything you can think of, it was there. No one talked about working animals. So they were everywhere, they were visible, but no one can see that. And we were the only ones, so we were the aliens. I'm happy to do so, because it's challenging, but it's also engaging and it's motivating, because like this is evidence in front of our eyes, but no one talks about it. So this year, last year it was cancelled because of COVID, but this year we submitted 2 applications to have 2 side events, obviously virtual side events because of obvious reasons, and we've been accepted. So for the first time, somebody an animal welfare organization is going to present with a partner organization, World of Welfare, with us. So we are going to present the case of working animals in the water sector. So I think, as Joao was saying, we should be brave, we should be bold, and we should step out of our comfort zone and talk about and promote the health and welfare of working animals, which is a reality in so many countries, in so many places, for so many different reasons. Because we all love animals, we all love, we all want them to have a life, not only a good life, but a life worth living, a very, very good life. So I think we should definitely be brave. And connecting to what Tim was saying, I agree with you, actually. I think we should highlight the modern technology and all the progress that has been done so far, and insist on this, as to use this as a first entry tool, and then expand on the animals. And a framework such the SDGs and other platforms, but let's talk about the SDGs, then allows us to do that. But again, we should not stop. We should really be brave. We should take any opportunity that we have. I'm a great believer in doing this, but I think we should not miss any opportunity we have to do that if we want to see results. It might take years, and we need to be patient, but we need to believe in that.
Thank you, Valentina. Before we come back to this big picture, I want to go once more a little bit more into detail and talk about the implements which are currently developed. We saw some really great examples of the impact these implements can have to make animal traction more affordable or make it more effective. And one thing that struck me was, and this brings me back a bit to the comment on the paper of Joao before, is that when I look at this equipment and developers of this equipment, maybe beside the cassine, which is more widely used, most of this equipment is specialized, or at least to some extent, as a horse-drawn implement. And I was wondering what you think of the comment that we might be a bit more focusing, or we should a little bit more focus on the individual type of draft animal and see and take into account what draft animal is the most common in the country, and then develop machines which can help make the work with them there easier. I mean, I saw some comments there on using some of these implements on oxen because they just move slower and they may not be able to use these implements as effective as a horse. But I think we always have, and this is why we're here, have the global picture in mind, and it doesn't bring something that we develop something especially for horses when in other parts of the world we definitely more implements for oxen or other draft animals. Tim?
Yeah, I'll be quick on this. I think that, well, again, it involves international work and the application of power. And I think it's important to continue to think about draft animal power as a farming, in the context of a farming system, and not just as a technology that we can take and drop into a community and say, go. You know, I think we also need to be thinking about building the capacity of technicians, mechanics, whoever, depending on the level, people who are building, designing tools, to rely on their ability to be in touch with farmers and understand their needs, and to also be helping to train them in addition to training the animals. I mean, we need to be building community. So I'll leave it at that.
That's true. I think Berta, weren't you about to add a comment as well?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to add something on the issue of the implements. You rightly said that we need to have implements that are specific to specific draft animals. And for instance, here in Africa, I think we have a lot of work that has been done linking specific implements, say, to donkeys or to oxen. But then the issue of the negative connotation of the draft animals has not worked very well, in the sense that there are not many manufacturers or blacksmiths who are working in that area. That could be one of the areas that we need to work on, to make sure that there are manufacturers who are then able to make those particular types of implements. Apart from maybe making implements that are lighter, that are suitable, let's say, to donkeys, we also need to think of the youngsters and the users. You find that in many areas, there are women who are using these implements. So some of these implements should also be designed in such a way that they can be used by women, they can be used by youngsters. And in that way, we also need to link that to politicians, like we mentioned before. Politicians, as long as they see a benefit, they will then be able to advocate for a certain or manufacturers in their areas. And if we have the grassroots, as in the users, the actual users of the implements, then they can also help us to advocate for lighter implements, advocate for manufacturers who can make these particular implements that we want to see. Thank you.
Thanks, Berta, for this really valuable comment. I think the manufacturing side is key in that respect. And I totally agree that when we talk about this topic, we have to understand that this manufacturing process ideally has to be done there in these countries. And of course, impulses come from outside, but it has to be adapted. And ideally, at least when you would ask me, I think manufacturers should be able to live from that in their communities, and or be the implements are so easy to make that everybody within the community of farmers, for instance, can do the implements. I mean, many organizations we're talking about in this conference are actually doing exactly this, like tillers and among others, Promata, for example. So this is really important. There's Paul.
Can I just say something, Klaus?
Yeah. Well, maybe first Paul. I think he was faster a little bit than you. Okay.
Go for it. Yep.
Yeah, yes, well, I agree with what Bertha was saying, but you know, I don't think that we should think that in sub-Saharan Africa in particular, that the design of animal traction implements is actually a limiting factor. I remember there was a workshop we had in Sierra Leone many years ago, and I think some of the people here were there, and the veterinarians were saying the problem is the health issue. The agricultural engineers were saying the limiting factor is animal power. And then they went out to villages, which is, I think, is really important to talk to people and listen to people. And they came back and say, well, actually, the limiting factor in that village is the bridge. They need the bridge. And it gave them a completely different perspective, seeing that. And I think Philip Lost and some other presentations were talking very much about a global way of an integrating look. So we look at the machine, we look at the animal, we look at the people, we look at the environment, and I don't think we just want lots of agriculture engineers going out and redesigning things or taking other designs. It needs to be working very much in an integrated approach for this.
Exactly. Thank you. João?
Yeah, in terms of the implements, and I have a general image of what is happening because I was behind the project I just mentioned about the Equith Power Network. And the idea that I have is that we need to understand that when you look at the implements we have nowadays, most of them came from the need that the specific farmer had to solve a problem. And then, funny enough, that to work for him, so he saw that was a possibility to have a small business. And that's, I would say, apart from the big Amish manufacturers, that's pretty much what we see worldwide. Someone develop a plow. You see that with many of the different French plows to work in the vineyards. You see that with the Spanish manufacturers nowadays that develop from the traditional tools. They made these multi-carrier tools that they really work well. So we are in a situation nowadays that we have these these manufacturers that work on a smaller scale that sometimes is difficult to replicate in a number that they can sell because they don't have the distribution capacity, or they don't even have a web page where they can show their tools. So it's all based on different users talking about the implements. And I'll like to say that's why it's so important to have the Fetchtag in Germany every 2 years, or the Horse Progress Days in the US, because it's really a good place to see all these equipment for all the fans of animal traction. But talking and using your initial words, Klaus, except from those tools that may need rotation, and Paul made a very good comment when someone asked about the hay tether or rake that he showed and that he explained that was from an Italian company where they managed to develop something that multiplies the force considering the speed of a horse or a speed of a cattle. At least when you talk with oxen, power is a less limiting factor when compared with draft horses. But now imagine what happens when you try to bring implements that was designed for horses into donkeys. Or when you try to bring complex technology into country, there's an expression used by many international agencies that what they call the orphan technology. You take a tractor into Africa, there's one bolt missing and the tractor is not working because there's no replacements in place. And sometimes with this very new machinery that we all like to show, because that's our way to say, hey, animal traction is also modern. Look the equipment we are having in here. Sometimes it's very difficult to take some of that technology in parts of the world where keeping those machinery working is very, very difficult. So, my message is, this transposition of technology from one country to another, from a species to another, can be a very complex process. And that's why, in my personal opinion, small implements such as the one that Prometa is developing for that scale is very interesting, because that it's very easy to maintain, easy to replicate, and very easy to fix if something goes wrong.
Thank you, João. Astrid?
Yeah, a problem is that here in Germany or in Europe, there is old technique available, and so we don't buy the modern technique. And so the people who want to sell it can't live from the development from new implement. And the implements which come from the Amish, for example, is for heavy horses, for a lot of horses, big and heavy. And yeah, that's one problem, I think, that there is no need for light and easy implements for cattle or donkeys or one small horse ponies in the countries which could pay it.
Yeah, I mean that's the problem from within. Then again, and I mean, it's when you think about that perspective you just highlighted, is when we work with this old equipment in a museum context, whatever, well, that is that look in the past we don't want, but we still display using these old implements. I mean, there's nothing wrong with recycling, but I totally agree that we would need projects, EU-funded projects, which would help us develop this equipment. And I just put in an application for showcasing draft animal power just next to our museum site to the public, and to maybe have some funding to develop some specifically for draft cattle working implements for various crops. So we'll see how that goes. Tim.
Yeah, this is very interesting, and I want to point out that one thing about tillers is tillers has a very extensive agricultural historical approach to farming equipment, and a museum, agricultural equipment museum, does not have to be a static thing. Although we don't use the tools, but what tillers does is they use the progression of tools and look at it from the standpoint of the physics of what those farmers were able to develop and see, and how it drove their innovations. And who use that for a starting point as we go to various communities, small farm communities, and try to provide a range of flexible options so they can pick the type of, for instance, tillage tool or whatever it may be that's most appropriate for them. And our approach really, I would say, is an agriculturally agroecological approach, where we really take time to work with the farmers. They're part of the process of defining the problems that they have, designing possible new implements, and assessing those, evaluating those, and then helping us to extend the results. And so we work very closely with the farmers in the community, and it's and it's really an adaptive approach to getting where they need to be, because it takes a while. It takes a while working with small farmers because, well, for a number of reasons, but it's important for us to teach local folks, blacksmiths, for instance, how to build the implements that their farmers are going to be using, because they need to repair those. They don't have access to parts. They need to have tools that are built with local materials and local skills. And so that's our approach, and I think it's an approach that can be used in all communities, not just developing countries.
That's true. Philippe, I was wondering, adding up on what Tim just said, when you think about your work and the development of the Cascine, to what extent would you say that the community over there played a role when achieving that goal of actually creating that implement? So how important do you think, despite all the work we have to do around that, the community is when it comes to development of new equipment or adjustments in harnessing and so on?
Thank you, Klaus. I'm sorry, and I have to apologize of my poor English, so I probably lost some details of your speech. But speaking of what we try to do in cooperation, mainly in West Africa, say, Burkina Faso, Mali, and so on, we think that we need, as Paul said, an integrated approach based mainly on the persons, on the farmers and their organization. Of course, the training of the farmers is quite important, as the training of the blacksmiths to make the Cascine, for instance, but it has to be integrated in work on also the animal welfare, harnessing, tools, and also on the practice, in order to have an agroecological approach of the farming system. Because we think that very often the agricultural policy of this country is not a good one. That is to say that very often we find communication on motorization, on the tractors and so on, and we think that in these small farms with a load of how do you say hand labor for the women especially, it is very important to use animal traction to improve the situation of the family. And of course, as we showed, we have a lot of proposition for that, but it has to be helped by the government policy and maybe also by the donors, because we think that we are not very much helped in this direction. Sorry for my bad English.
No, it's perfect. It was perfect. I think that that aspect you just raised again with the empowerment which is possible with draft animal use when it comes to gender equality is something which can really help moving forward with this. Before we have to end with this really great conference and the panel discussion, let me ask one more question into the panel. Throughout the preparation of the conference, I came across an idea which was facilitated to me from various people. And that is that it might help if we would try as a global approach, not just on a national approach, to get recognition of draft animal use as a UNESCO intangible heritage thing. So I was wondering what you think about this idea, especially when you think about the problems arising from that historic perspective. But on the other hand, this may be an aspect of empowering, building up a bigger foundation to get more voices for this specific topic of draft animals. So what do you think of that idea to get recognition as UNESCO World Heritage, as intangible heritage? Paul?
Yep, I think it's a very good idea. I think, as Joel said, that the idea of going in all directions. But I think, as has been pointed out in this afternoon's session, there are plenty of SDGs where animal power is really important, including gender equality. And yet there's no, we're not really leveraging the SDGs. Anything like this, getting the UNESCO to recognize it as a, something of international heritage, I think is only to be welcomed. So I would think that's very positive.
Valentina?
I agree. I agree with Professor Starkey, actually. I think your idea is a great one. Anything to do to get closer to recognition and the acknowledgement of the immense value of draft animals. I mean, having a UNESCO status within the UNESCO is fantastic, and but there are other options as well. So while it's true that at the moment the SDG framework has been criticized by some organizations because it doesn't explicitly mention animals and animal welfare. However, there are things that can be done. So for instance, we can use the voluntary national reviews, which are reports that UN member states present on their progress on sustainable development. So working, for instance, through coalitions like the Working Animal Alliance, but also other partnerships, then we can lobby government to include working animals and draft animals in the VNR, so in these reports, to highlight how these animals are valuable for their progress towards development. So this is another option as well. So the Declaration for UNESCO, the VNRs, and also the SDGs, so targets and indicators, are being reviewed regularly. So every 4 or 5 years. So the next review is going to be in 2023, if I'm not mistaken. And again, this is another opportunity that we have if we want to include provision regarding the health and welfare of draft animals.
Thank you, Valentina. Astrid?
I agree also, and I have another idea. Perhaps it would be possible to make emblem, a symbol like ecological produce food. It could be a symbol for food produced with draft animal, which is international. So we perhaps can get the appreciation also in other countries where it's perhaps not something appreciated till now.
Yeah, that's really, really important. I mean, giving it a label is something that can really push things.
There are some. I think the EGZ makes something for that, like that in Germany. So on a national basis.
I think there are quite a few national initiatives which developed logos. I came across about a year ago a logo about draft animal powered farms, and I think there's a lot of potential there. We have to come to an end, and I want to thank all of the panelists for these really really good final discussion, and I would like to thank all of the people actively participating in the conference. I mean, as all the people already stated several times, also the chat window developed into a conference of its own to some extent sometimes, and I can only assure you that we will make sure that we will get this chat record to all the participants. We have to clear some things which are just organizational stuff out of there first, because we get all the rough data when we save it. But I think there won't be a problem to facilitate this all. So let's now come to some concluding remarks to that conference. And it feels hard to do or to find the proper words. I'm a bit overwhelmed by the positive resonance of that conference, even in preparation. I never thought that we would make it up to more than 420 registrations to this conference from people from more than 30 countries. But all of this made me believe and empowered me to see that it is the right time to talk about this topic. And I think we can all agree, and several ideas were raised also within the chat, that this shouldn't be a one-time thing. We should meet again, and we might have to focus on specific aspects the next time, to bring in more experts, and maybe also with a little longer time for preparation. You can be assured that I sleep well for the next 2 or 3 days, if my cow will let me, which she won't, but that's another story. I think, and this might be a good sentence to sum it up, I think when we think about shaping the future of draft animals and the package that comes along, sustainable farming and all the other stuff we talked about, I think we can all agree that there is not one solution, that there is not one alliance or one network that will solve all the problems. I think it's what we just did the last 2 days. It's bringing all these different organizations actively to talk to each other and raising awareness of each other. And then again, go back to a national, to a regional, and to a local level to facilitate these ideas. And I'm really looking forward to continuing the work all of you are doing. And as a result of that conference, and because, of course, I am a cattle person, I decided also to create a global draft cattle network to be one player to facilitate specific needs and aspects of that draft animal into that wider discussion. And then again, there's nothing left to say for me, but thank you all. Thank you all which helped with the organization of this conference and for going through. Thanks to all the chairs and all the questions raised. And I hope that we, of course, also in a more physical way can meet again. But then again, I think these bigger conferences might be actually be better in a digital way, because then more people can attend. I mean, we will never be able to solve all the problems that somebody stated it in the chat right well. Somewhere in the world, it's always summer and a lot of work to do. And so we will never get everybody. For me, it's the summer, which is busy at the museum. I can't do it. For others, it's another time of the year. But we will always get enough people to continue on talking with each other. And I think that's something with which I want to close this conference. Thank you all, and wishing you all a good Sunday, if it's still Sunday where you are at, and hope to see you all again soon. Bye-bye to everybody.
Thanks, Klaus.
Bye. Thanks a lot. Bye.